A few moments late, I couldn't get through the security, either the car or the local security. In any event, I'd like to welcome you here this evening and take advantage of these few moments just before Mrs. Meir arrives to introduce our platform guests. As I call their names, I would ask you to refrain from acknowledging them until all have been introduced. Beginning on my far left, is this thing working? Yes. On my far left and your right, Dr. Ralph Halbert, chairman of the 1971 United Jewish Appeal Campaign for Metropolitan Toronto, Mr. Isidore Levinter, QC, president of Beth Tzedec Congregation, Alderman David Rotenberg, president of the Council of the City of Toronto, Dr. Stuart Rosenberg, rabbi of Beth Tzedec Congregation, Mr. Hyman Besson, president of the Federated Zionist Organization of Canada, Mr. Munro Abbey, president of the Canadian Jewish Congress, my immediate right, Mr. Abel Selig, president of Canadian B'nai B'rith, Dr. Gunther Plaut, chairman of the Canada-Israel Committee and rabbi of Holy Blossom Temple, and Mr. Albert Latner, chairman of the State of Israel Bonds, and my name is Ray Wolf. Gentlemen, your platform guests. Now, one more small request. At the conclusion of this meeting, for reasons which you can well understand, I ask that no one leave this sanctuary for at least 5 minutes after the Prime Minister and her party have left the platform. It won't do you any good in any event because the doors will be locked for 10 minutes after the proceedings have been finished. Since our distinguished guest, accompanied by Ambassador Evron and Consul General F. Geffen, has now arrived, would you please rise and join with me in a very hearty shalom to Her Excellency, the Prime Minister of the State of Israel, Mrs. Golda Meir. Please remain standing. Join with us in the singing of O Canada and Hatikva, which will be led by Cantor Cooper and the Beth Tzedec Choir. Since the excitement of this moment permeates all age levels, may I call upon Master Samuel Levinter and Miss Lena Noy to start our program by presenting Mrs. Meir with a floral token of our great happiness in having her with us this evening. This is the second time that the Jewish community has called upon Beth Tzedec for its facilities for a message from the Prime Minister of Israel. And we are indeed indebted to the congregation not only for the use of these premises, but also for the splendid cooperation of its officials and staff. It's a great pleasure, accordingly, to call upon Stuart Rosenberg, the spiritual leader of our host congregation, to extend a welcome to Beth Tzedec's guests this evening. Dr. Stuart Rosenberg.
כבוד ראש הממשלה, כבוד השגריר, כבוד הנכבדים, ladies and gentlemen, it is a very special privilege to be here tonight in this room with these people. This community of Canada, the Jewish community, is essentially a young community, not many more than 200 years old. And yet it's a very old community because of the ties that link the Jews here to Jews everywhere. What was forged in Jerusalem thousands of years ago still shapes our character and informs our psyche and makes us part of a world family. So we're a young community with old and tested traditions. And tonight we are brought together by a very old community, the community of the land of Israel, one of the oldest communities of human civilization and one of the youngest. It is young, though old, because it is a symbol not so much of the past for us as it is of the future. I have a suspicion that sometimes that's why it's so threatening to so many people who are outside of our family. For it is a symbol not of the Jew of yesterday alone, but of the Jew of tomorrow, of a vital people clinging to life and informing the world and inspiring it still. Your Excellencies, Madam Prime Minister, it is no coincidence that a synagogue houses this meeting tonight of an old community and a new community, of a new community and an old one, of the people of Israel joined together in terms of its past, speaking to its future. For this synagogue, every synagogue, is a repository of the dreams of this people and of its anticipations of peace, shalom, for tomorrow. It is no coincidence that in this synagogue, all of the prime ministers of Israel, 2 while in office and 2 after they left office, spoke to the Jewish community of Canada. We of this synagogue, and I would think, therefore, of all synagogues in the world, pray for you, for your people, our people, that the peace which came from Jerusalem will come again, and that the people of Jerusalem will sing new songs unto the Lord, praising his name again. May God bless you and all who are of you. Brucha haba'ah. Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi Rosenberg. And now, Alderman David Rotenberg, President of the Council of the City of Toronto, will make a presentation to the Prime Minister on behalf of the City of Toronto. Alderman Rotenberg.
Mr. Chairman, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure for me, Madam Prime Minister, on behalf of Mayor Dennison and the City Council, to welcome you to Toronto and to thank you for honoring our city with your visit. Through you, we want to express our admiration for the State of Israel, which stands out among the new nations of the world for its many marvelous achievements. You have absorbed over 1 million immigrants and have given each immediate and full civil rights. You have suffered economic hardship and yet have maintained all of the social benefits for your people. You have fought and won 3 wars and have not become a militaristic nation. And in all of this, you have remained a free and democratic people with a free and democratic government. In short, Israel's 22-year history is a shining example to our troubled world and an inspiration to men who are free and to men who would be free. And so, Your Excellency, on behalf of the City of Toronto, as a token of our sincere friendship for the brave people of Israel, and as a token of our sincere admiration for your wise and courageous leadership, I wanted to present you with this small gift, which is a gold pin in the shape of a maple leaf, the symbol of Canada, and engraved on it is the coat of arms of the City of Toronto. I hope that when you return to Israel, you will wear this pin in good health as a reminder to you and to your colleagues that the people of Toronto, all of the people of Toronto, share your prayer. Peace in Israel, peace for Israel.
I'm sure every Jew in Canada wanted to be here tonight, and some, I can tell you, were mighty belligerent about making their wishes known. If, however, the physical limitations precluded their presence, at least they're well represented by the 3 national organizations who bring greetings to the Prime Minister from constituencies which extend from the Atlantic to the Pacific. To initiate this phase of this evening's activities, I call first upon Mr. Monroe Abbey, the National Chairman of the Canadian Jewish Congress. Mr. Monroe Abbey.
Mr. Chairman, Your Excellencies, worthy rabbis, ladies and gentlemen, the visit to Canada of Israel's Prime Minister, Mrs. Golda Meir, who is our guest tonight, is an inspirational one which cannot fail to achieve great results. In a sense, it is too bad that when you find a woman of valor, who, as the Bible tells us, has a price above that of rubies, and we find this exemplar in Mrs. Meir, one has to hold up such a real, live, determined personality as a symbol. But it is so. Our guest is a symbol, and a real live one, of our inner feelings on the impact of Israel on Canadian Jewish life. Our attitudes can in no way be evaluated in the same comparison scale with the influence of pre-1948 Zionism. of former generations' lingering adhesion of ghetto life has been shed to be replaced by a new, vigorous, and healthy diaspora Jewish posture and meaning. And so much of this is due to the magnetism of the builders of the State of Israel, not the least of which is Mrs. Meir. Israel's Prime Minister furnishes the Jewish world with examples of matchless courage and determined statesmanship. She also furnishes the world in general with proof that a small nation with all too few physical resources cannot be a pawn on the world's chessboard to be pushed square to square until sacrifice. Israel is everybody's business. It is the business of national organizations of the Zionist family, but it is also the business of other national bodies. It is also the work of local organizations not affiliated at all with Zionist organizations. It is the creed of individuals. Zionism as a philosophy lives alongside Israelism as a practical program. It is not that everyone wants to get into the act. It is the act which gets into everyone. There can be no monopolies when the existence of Israel is the warp and the woof of all our life patterns and style. Without this, Israel's position would be considerably weaker. We in Canada salute Mrs. Golda Meir as an international figure, a towering figure on the stage of current world history, as an idealist with tough fiber, and a realistic leader. But above all, we join tonight in greeting her as a great Prime Minister of a very great state. We see in her the embodiment of the people of Israel. And so we welcome Mrs. Golda Meir as a vibrant, valorous, cherished human being. And we also see in her a symbol. Her career buttresses the accepted figure of speech that a ship is always called she. And in her personal and symbolic role, I paraphrase a well-known poem. Sail on, ship of state, sail on, strong and great. Humanity with all its fears, with all the hopes of future years, is hanging breathless on thy fate. We welcome you, and we thank you for coming, and pray that you, as ship of state, find safe harbors and havens at all times.
Thank you, Monroe. Now we will hear from Mr. Hyman Besson, the National President of the Federated Zionist Organization of Canada. Mr. Besson.
Mr. Chairman, Your Excellency, Ambassador Evron, distinguished assembly, this is a great and unforgettable event in the history of Canadian Jewry, and in particular for the Canadian Zionist family. We welcome you, Madam Prime Minister, as any family would welcome a beloved relative and respected leader with deep affection and loyal devotion. Your presence in our midst, representing the State of Israel to the highest councils of the world, serves as an inspiring reminder that the Zionist dream of centuries is a reality. Zeh hayom asa Hashem nagila v'nismacha b'vo. God privileged us to witness this day, and we rejoice and delight in it. Yours is not an easy task to administer the government of a country that is trying to make up for almost 2,000 years of neglect and corrosion. the complex problems of kibbutz galuyot must be solved and the demands of the growing population must be met. Economic issues abound, yet development and defense budgets claim priority. It takes not only tremendous ability and stamina to head such a nation, it requires a special quality. It is called Ahavat Yisrael, the Eretz Yisrael, a love for the Jewish people and a commitment to the land of Israel. This is the mystique of the woman who honors us tonight, whom King Solomon must have had in mind when he composed an ode to the exemplary woman and wrote, Oz ve'hadar levusha, strength and dignity are her clothing. Yes, in moments of dilemma and crisis, you have proven a tower of strength, facing up not only to the enemy, but to the so-called friends and allies, with firmness and dignity, with fortitude and courage. When my two sons, Moshe and Beryl, returned from Israel after volunteering for the Six-Day War, my wife noticed that on all their clothing, shirts, jackets, underwear, and socks, there were little labels, and in black laundry ink was written the word Giyus, mobilization. I assure you, madam, that this label can be affixed to the clothes of all the fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters of our people in Canada. Giyus, mobilization. All of us stand shoulder to shoulder with the state in its gigantic task of creating and building a fruitful and peaceful Eretz Yisrael. And to give concrete evidence of the fact that this is so, may I state that in little more than a month, almost 20,000 have already signed their names on a membership application in response to the membership campaign which the FZOC, the Canadian Zionist Federation, launched this fall. Like this gathering tonight, this unprecedented response to our membership campaign is a concrete manifestation of our oneness as a people, of the renewal of the pledge we made 1900 years ago by the rivers of Babylon. Im eshkachech Yerushalayim tishkach yemini. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, may my right hand lose its strength. Mrs. Meir, when you were ambassador in Russia, jury there reverently called you Golda Shalanu, our Golda. In Israel, they say Golda Shalanu with fondness. We too also say it with pride. May God bless you.
I don't know if there's any significance about this, but High Besson was supposed to speak in Hebrew this evening. However, when he found out he only had 3 minutes, he said it would take him at least 3 minutes to get warmed up, so he reverted to English. Finally, in our bringing of greetings, we have Mr. Abel Selig, the National President of B'nai B'rith of Canada, who will address us in both English and French. Mr. Abel Selig.
Madame le Premier Ministre, bienvenue au Canada. There are many aspects of Israel and Canada that are so very similar. Both of our countries are multilingual, with French and English predominating in Canada, as Hebrew, English, and Arabic predominate in Israel. Both of our countries cherish freedom and democracy. Both of our countries will not surrender to extremists or terrorists. Au Canada, dans la province de Québec, il y a des milliers de Juifs canadiens qui parlent le français, dont plusieurs d'eux sont membres de B'nai B'rith. De la même façon, il y a des Israélites et Israël qui sont membres de B'nai B'rith, de langue hébreu et anglais. I speak, therefore, as one of the links of B'nai B'rith in 47 countries, including 150 lodges in Israel, all of whom have a sympathy and empathy for the survival and growth of the State of Israel. As Canadians, we are proud of the example that Israel typifies, that democracy can survive under stress. Indeed, that freedom can grow under fire. We therefore say that spiritually, all Canadians, in fact, all men who cherish liberty, are Israelis at heart. And as freedom is indivisible, so will our assistance be unlimited and unstinted. Your Excellency, the free world has had many occasions to applaud your courage in the brief history of the State of Israel. In the recent past, the free world has also had occasion to applaud the courage of our Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Pierre Elliott Trudeau, in his efforts to maintain and sustain the traditions of democracy. It is therefore appropriate that both of you meet at Ottawa tomorrow. As your philosophies are so identical, and as one former schoolteacher speaking to another, we are certain that your deliberations and discussions will be fruitful in furthering our common aims of peace for all men. Mrs. Meir, to all of us, you are a woman who has made the inconceivable achievable because you made the impossible believable. Mrs. Meir, to all of us, you are a woman of great competence, firmness, and yet gentleness. And when we speak your name, we speak it with love and admiration. Our Canadian Jewish community welcomes you. Canada welcomes you. You do us great honor in your visit to our country and our community. Baruch haba shalom.
Thank you, Abel. In these days of instant communication, all who can read, see, or hear know Golda Meir, the cause she expounds, and the principles she upholds. A wide cacophony of discord notwithstanding, her voice is one of the few in these trying days that relentlessly recalls the world's focus to those values, and only those values, which permit us to move even fractionally forward in the civilizing process. In a world which seems bent on destroying itself, her voice rings out in stark contrast to the mockery and the cynicism of today's international opportunists to plead for peace, for justice, for freedom, and for opportunity for all people on this earth. When, in just a few moments, she speaks to us, all of us, and more particularly those who will hear her for the first time, we will be able to weigh for ourselves the real meaning of family and the importance of life, particularly if it is the life of a son, a brother, or a father. I don't know how old Mrs. Meir is, but her schedule this week would stagger even a teenager. This morning she breakfasted in New York, arrived in Toronto at 10:30, has already addressed 3 major assemblies, and had 2 TV appearances. Tomorrow she has an even more demanding schedule in Ottawa as guest of Prime Minister Trudeau, and before midnight tomorrow she will leave for London, England. I don't have the words to describe her, but perhaps King Solomon in his wisdom did. In Proverbs 31, in his extolling a woman of valor, her price, he said, is far above rubies. Strength and majesty are her clothing. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the law of loving kindness is on her tongue. Many daughters have done worthily, but thou excellest them all. Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister of the State of Israel.
Distinguished Rabbi, friends and heads of organizations, representative of the Council of the City of Toronto, thank you very much for the lovely pin which says much, and I shall cherish it. Friends, on one of the TV interviews today, I was told that a very important commission went to Israel, went to the Middle East, and came back with a report. And one of its items was that the state of Israel has a right to exist. And I'm sure that the gentleman who interviewed me was rather taken aback when I was not impressed. The idea that there are people in this world today who take it upon themselves and wish, I suppose, to be taken seriously by others, sit in judgment whether the one and only one country in the world has it a right to exist or has it not. The greatest thing that has happened in this last decade, the greatest accomplishment of the United Nations, is that during the life of the United Nations, and more specifically in the last 10 or 15 years, so many peoples of the world, very few large ones, very many small ones, have stepped into their own and have become free and sovereign states. I used to come to the United Nations every year, and there was always a day of joy for me, and I'm sure for many, when little countries stepped into membership of what is called the family of nations. Among them were people, 300,000, 500,000. Every one of them had a right to aspire to and to achieve their independence, their sovereignty, to be masters of their own destiny. Have I heard during these years that any commission, no matter how important, no matter what institutions they represent, would take it upon themselves to go and come back with this astounding decision? One of the 127 countries of the United Nations has a right to exist. Somehow it is possible to question and then either to give us the right to exist, and some have gone and come and said we have no right to exist. The only country in the world, the only people in the world, over whose heads some believe there is still a question mark, is Israel. We live in a world that is supposed to be a free world. We live in a world where all men, decent men and women, would not dare question the desire, the ambition, and the struggle for freedom and independence of any people. But we, not newcomers into human society, we were not born yesterday, and may I say, without others taking it amiss, this people happens to have contributed somewhat to civilization. It's not only on the books, it's on every rock in the country. One is not safe in trying to build a foundation for his home without striking something, and something written on it, that reminds one of thousands of years. This people, just because our fate has been twice before in our history, when our land was occupied, the lands of many nations throughout the ages have been occupied by foreign rule, but the people remained in the land. And therefore it was simpler. They hoped, they struggled, they believed, they dreamt, and finally the foreign power was thrown out and they became independent. As so many countries that are now newcomers into the United Nations. Our fate was more tragic even than that. Twice before in our history, when our country was occupied by foreign powers, we were not allowed to remain on the land. We were dispersed. How we fared in our dispersion, how we were treated for almost 2,000 years among the peoples of the world, all that is written down, is known, written down not always with ink, most of the time with tears and blood. This is our history. We are the generation that the most brutal power that ever stood up in the civilized world did not only question the right of our sovereign existence, but questioned whether any one of us individually, just because he has sinned, he is a Jew, must go. They questioned, and they answered, and they tried. They didn't succeed 100%. Only 1/3 of the Jewish people was sent to the gas chambers, and 2/3 remained. And I suppose if we had spent the rest of our lives weeping over those that are no more, writing about what has happened to us, absorbing the pity from all the world, nobody would have questioned whether we have a right to weep. But it just happened that this people never gave up. Logical, rational, I don't know. But the fact is that we have never given up. And the fact is that after the greatest of all tragedies that has happened to us, and I say happened to us, happened to the world. No world can go on about its business when 1/3 of the Jewish people is sent to the gas chambers. Everybody remembers it, whether they want to or not. It has left a mark everywhere. And after that, the long dream of the return has taken place. Not after that. Decades and decades ago, young men and women were not satisfied merely with dreaming and hoping and weeping. They went and laid the foundation so that after Hitler, there was something in the land. What did we acquire in 1947 through the United Nations? A little tiny strip of land. But one great thing. When people ask us, how is it that we accepted that partition? If there are some of you that remember the original map, with an internationalized Jerusalem, a Jewish state and Jerusalem internationalized and not a part of it. And we said yes. We closed our eyes and we saw 3 years after the war, after Hitler was no more, and the free world was victorious. And 3 years after the war, there were 300,000 men, women, and children behind barbed wires in Cyprus, in the camps in Europe. We closed our eyes, we saw them, and we said yes, because by that we got the key to the port of Haifa. And no more illegal immigrants, and no more boats were going to be driven away, and no more Jews will have to steal into the night to try and come into their homeland. And no young people would have to go like thieves in the night down to the Negev and up to the Galil to put up their little tents and a wire around them and call it a Jewish settlement, because by law it was forbidden. And we're over 20 years old, and we refuse to give up. And we had all the odds against us in 48, in 56, in 67. Thank God we never asked anybody to come and help us. We never asked for one single soldier from any army. All the blood that was shed for our being was that of our sons and daughters. And every time when our Arab neighbors wanted to throw us into the sea, and they did not succeed, people looked at us as though we are guilty of something. because it was said that Nasser could not possibly make peace with Israel because he was humiliated and frustrated. And we are to blame. 3 times he fought us, 3 times he failed, and therefore is humiliated and frustrated. And what kind of a people are we? Hard-hearted, stubborn. There is no sign of our wanting to be accommodating. Nasser wanted to destroy us, and we didn't let him. And he was humiliated and frustrated, and no peace with Israel for over 20 years. And between the wars, no peace. No peace on the borders. The Syrians on the Golan Heights shooting at our agricultural settlements below. The Egyptians in the Gaza Strip causing the young mothers in the kibbutzim around the Gaza Strip to raise their children underground. The same as the kibbutzim and moshavim and the new towns of Beit Shan and Kiryat Shmona, on the Lebanese border, Syrian border, the Jordanian border, after the Six-Day War. The children are growing up underground. There are children that don't know what it means to sleep in a normal bed in a room. It's over 3.5 years now. Those of 2 years and 3 years old, those of 4 and 5 have forgotten that it is possible to sleep in a room above ground. This is their home. They spend a good part of the day when there is shelling, also a good part of the day in the air shelters. There's the kindergarten, there's the classroom, there's where they play. But not one single village, not one single kibbutz or moshav has been evacuated during these 3.5 years and during the war before that. Are we heroes? We're not heroes, but this is ours. We don't run away from it. This is what we have built, and this we must preserve. And when somebody comes and tells us now, he weighs the matter. Have we a right to exist, or have we not? Let him go to one of those air shelters and speak to the 5- and 6-year-olds and put the question to them. Or let him come to them with this great message that he has. Let him go into these shelters and tell the children, "Dear children, I've come to tell you, I've weighed the matter, you have a right to exist." Or maybe to go down to the Suez Canal or the Golan Heights or in the Jordan Valley and call the boys and girls of 18 and 19 and 20, these children who carry the burden of the survival of a people, not only the survival of Israel. They are convinced, as I am, I'm sure as many of you are, all of you, the survival of Israel is not the survival of 2.5 million Jews. The survival of Israel is a matter, are we as a people going to survive in the world? Not physically. It's not a question of physical existence. What's going to happen to our generations, God forbid, if Israel is not here? And these youngsters on the battlefield, in the Sinai and the Golan Heights, while these young boys were going up with their tanks daytime, crawling up to the Golan Heights targets for all the bullets, more than at any other time, did they feel their complete identification with the Jewish people all over the world. Something that we thought at times maybe they were not conscious of. These are Sabras, second, third generation born in Israel. Yes, difficulties, struggles, wars, but straight Israelis. And we thought, do they realize that there is a connection? It's not only the few of us that are there. And anyone that has heard them, anyone that has read what they have written, what they have said, they have found themselves as part of you, and you as part of us, when they were faced with Russian tanks and Russian guns in the Sinai and on the Golan Heights, when they were fighting for Jerusalem, when so many of them fell in the Battle of Jerusalem, because the orders were that despite the fact that the Jordanians put up their guns on all holy places, Christian holy places, Jewish holy places they destroyed before, therefore we must not use artillery. And many of our boys fell in that terrible battle for Jerusalem because of that order. Because we have a peculiar idea. We think that if our holy places are holy to us, then Christian holy places are holy to Christians, and Muslim holy places are holy to Muslims. And the order was to safeguard it, to protect it, and even if we had to pay with the lives of many of the boys. When they found themselves against these great odds, we weren't fighting only the Arabs. My friends, we were fighting all that Russia possessed in the best of arms, in the most modern, in fantastic quantities. As we are facing today, not only the Egyptians, not only the Syrians, the missiles in the Suez Canal zone on the other side of the canal are not Egyptian-made missiles, nor are they all manned by Egyptians. Without the Russians bringing in the missiles, without thousands of Russians in that narrow strip in the canal zone, thousands of them manning these missiles, directing the work of the Egyptians, they wouldn't have been there. If the close to 20,000 Russians weren't in Egypt today, if they hadn't immediately after the Six-Day War airlifted again tanks and guns and planes, better and more modern, I'm convinced we would have had peace today. I say if it hadn't been for the Russians, we wouldn't have had the Six-Day War. And the world looks upon us, and over again we are asked, why don't you negotiate? Why don't you just conveniently step back to the 1967 borders, as though in 1967 we were in some other borders, as though the war that broke out in 1967 broke out because we were not in the 1967 borders. That's exactly where we were. Why are the borders of 1967 holier today than they were in 67? Why the war? What was the purpose of that war? To keep us on the borders of 1967? The purpose of that war was one and one only. Far beyond the 1967 borders. The only border that was recognized by Egypt and Syria and their Russian friends was the Mediterranean, and we on the other side. And we did not cooperate. And we fought back. A small people with great odds against us. No comparison in numbers of men, no comparison in numbers of planes and tanks. But the spirit of the people, not only of the boys and girls in the army, but the men and women at home, in the streets, in the agricultural settlements, in the north and the south, all over. The spirit that we have no alternative. We must win. What we are trying to tell our neighbors and the entire world after the Six-Day War, we've won 67, 56, 48, but we have taken an oath not to do anything now which will pave the way for a new victory in war. We are just not prepared to raise generation after generation. First we, then our sons, now our grandchildren. We refuse to accept this fate, that this is the fate of future generations in Israel. When there is a war, we fight it, we pay in the lives of our dear ones, we are victorious, we make some kind of peace, or we step back without making peace. UN observers, UN emergency force, all kinds of solutions except one. Simple negotiations with our neighbors and a signed peace agreement with solemn undertakings and securities not by the UN, nor by UN observers, nor by the big powers that are really big, or those that still think that they are big. The only security that we have known is the people of Israel. The only reason that Israel is here, despite these wars, despite the odds against us, we are here, is not because somebody has given us security. Three big powers in 1950 notified us, they didn't ask, that they guarantee the safety and the borders of all states in the Middle East, including Israel. I must say, we didn't get up every morning and say, well, we have nothing to worry about. The three powers have guaranteed us our safety. Do you know when they announced that it isn't valid anymore? Just a few days before the Six-Day War. The only guarantee is borders which are defensible, borders that we will consider secure, borders negotiated between us and our neighbors, agreed borders between us and our neighbors. Borders that do not give a natural advantage to our neighbors. Borders that in themselves must be a deterrent. That when our neighbors again someday will want to attack us, they'll think twice. Believe me, if we are on the Golan Heights, Syria will think many, many times whether to attack us. If we are down below and they are on the heights, they don't have to think a lot. They put up guns and shoot. These are the things that we want to avoid. It's not true, it's simply not true that we are out for territories. Expansion, territorial expansion. As though we don't have enough sand of our own. But we refuse to go back exactly to the place where we were attacked. And we refuse to accept something that is instead of peace. And when we decided to accept the American initiative and to negotiate not directly, although we are still convinced that the only way really to negotiate is directly with our neighbors, those that fought each other, they are the ones that must make peace with each other. But we agreed to talk through Dr. Yaring, being convinced that you don't sign a peace agreement with somebody through somebody, by proxy. You don't carry on a war by proxy, and you don't make a peace agreement by proxy. But we thought, we'll begin. Eventually, we will meet. And part of that proposal of the United States government was ceasefire, and we accepted. We never agreed to a limited ceasefire, because we always said a limited ceasefire means that if the ceasefire is 90 days, then on the 91st day, they can begin to shoot, and that's legal, so to say. But when in this ceasefire proposal, there was a very important item, standstill, so that no party, neither we nor the Egyptians, could do anything during this 3-month period of ceasefire that would improve the strategic positions. And we knew what we feared. Therefore, we asked detailed questions. What about moving of missiles? What about new sites? What about the construction of new sites? What about filling the sites that are there? And we got clear, distinct answers on all of these questions. No moving of missiles, no new construction, no new sites. We didn't ask the United States government whether they would move in missiles. The United States government was the go-between. And they went to Egypt, and they asked Moscow. And Moscow agreed, and Egypt agreed. With all my great respect for the foreign minister of the Soviet Union, when Mr. Gromyko says we were not a partner to this agreement, and Mr. Rogers says the ambassador of the Soviet Union told me after he got in touch with his government that you agree, I believe Mr. Rogers. And within a few hours after the agreement was signed, after the ceasefire went into effect, the missiles started moving. And by this time, the entire area is filled up with missiles. SAM 2 and SAM 2 improved, and SAM 3, and it'll interest you to know that we are privileged. The SAM 3s are not given to everybody, only to East Germany and to Egypt. That's out of respect to us and to our Army and to our Air Force. And the most natural reaction on our part was, how can we possibly sit down and negotiate through Dr. Yaring with the Egyptians? What are we going to negotiate about? We're going to negotiate how do we come to a peace agreement. We're going to negotiate where the secure border should be. And we wanted, and we said, and our policy is, agreed secure borders. And supposing somewhere, and it's natural, especially with Egypt, that somewhere we will say, this is the secure border, and everything that is beyond the secure border is yours. And we march out, and Egypt marches in. What will we get in return except a promise, a signature on the part of Egypt? No war, no threat of war, no belligerency, no attacking us, free shipping through the Suez Canal, all these things we've already had before. But we are prepared to try again. Maybe they also have learned a lesson. But in Egypt, with their great brother, having promised to the United States and to us that certain things will be observed, certain things will not be done, and no sooner does the ceasefire go into effect when they immediately begin violating their promise, violating their undertaking. What sense is there to negotiate? And now people turn around to us exactly as the talk of the humiliation because the Arabs didn't win the war, and they say, yes, but it's a question of face-saving now. How can you really humiliate them? Poor things. They cheated. How can you tell them that they cheated? And if you tell them that they cheated, how can you tell them that you must correct the situation? You must live up to your promise, to your agreement. Take them back, and then we'll negotiate. And when we are told, of course you are right, and of course they cheated, but face-saving. And we say face-saving is very important. Life-saving is more important. And when good people say to us, you are right, your planes, more of them will come down than without the missiles, if and when shooting is resumed, and we will not be the ones to resume it. But if the Egyptians begin again, and more planes will come down, of course you are entitled for rectification. Rectification in this instance means you'll get more planes. Very nice. It only happens that in the planes are our sons. Nobody can rectify that. And we refuse to go into a situation. We have no right to go into a situation that endangers the life of our sons more than I almost said is natural. They're carrying a big burden. It's the most heartbreaking thing in the world. My friends, you received me tonight as a Prime Minister. I often, late at night, when all the papers have been read, cables, reports, and I sit alone in my study, I ask myself, by what zchut? Why I? Then I answer to myself, not not privilege, of honor. It's a great honor to be Prime Minister of the State of Israel. But my friends, the burden, the heartache, the necessity of making decisions sometimes when boys are sent out on missions, dangerous missions, they're sitting near the telephone all night long and waiting for reports. That magic word, when planes went over to the other side, and that magic word, they came back safely, all of them. But that is not always the report. There are different reports. Not all came back safely. Some remained prisoners on the other side, and some are dead, and some are wounded. And it doesn't help, my friends, when you go to the hospital and you visit these wounded ones and you see them within a heroism that one cannot understand. Our doctors, our surgeons don't understand it. How is it not a word, not a sigh out of them, not a complaint? You think this helps? On the contrary, it's more difficult. It's more heartbreaking. If they would only complain. These youngsters are carrying a terrible burden. And it is our business and it is our duty not to make it heavier by one hair. It is our duty to see, as much as within our power, that this time is the end of all wars. And my friends, this is the only thing that we are struggling for. Not more sand, not more rocks, not more territory, but for security and the assurance that we at least have done everything within our power, that we have not done the same as in 1957 when we stepped right back to the place from which we came, and actually it paved the war for 1967. It's true, 10 years have passed. One more generation that has reached the age of 18, 19, 20, again in war. We are stubborn, so it is said. And it is said that we're not flexible. I plead guilty. We are stubborn. We are not flexible. We're terribly stubborn. We want peace. We don't want anything from our neighbors. Just peace. And my friends, we're not always understood. This is a British understatement. We're not always applauded. And when things get pretty difficult, you have to explain yourself so much. You have to give so many excuses why you have a right to exist. You have to give so many excuses why don't you let Arafat choose. Free choice, it is said in the United Nations. So you let Arafat choose. Is it convenient for him to destroy us from the Jordanian side of the border? Or does he think that it'll be easier for him to do it if, according to free choice, he leads his Fatah army across the border and into Israel? And we are stubborn. And we say no country in the world gives free choice to people to come in who want to destroy it. There were fifth columns in many countries, but it wasn't done by the free choice of the people that fifth columns were created. 47, they could have accepted the resolution of 47. They could have set up another Arab state in the Western Bank and the Gaza Strip. They didn't do it, they fought us. And Abdullah, without the United Nations, merely annexed the Western Bank. And he and afterwards Hussein gave Jordanian citizenship to hundreds of thousands of the former Palestinians who are today Jordanian citizens. If they want Jordan to be called Palestine, we have nothing against it. They don't have to ask our permission or our consent. One thing must be clear. Between the Mediterranean and the Iraqian border, there is room for two states, and two states only, an Arab state and a Jewish state. And I say when things become difficult, there are moments of sorrow and so on, every one of us and I think of you. Too much explanation we don't have to give you. Too much apologizing to you why we are. You're not frustrated, you're not humiliated. You rather like the idea that we weren't thrown into the sea. You are with us. You have been with us. And we come and tell you frankly, the struggle is still going on. As far as we are concerned, there shouldn't have been a war. And if there was a war, there could have been peace easily. But it doesn't depend upon us. To make war, it's quite sufficient when one party decides and acts. For peace, you need two. We are prepared, depends upon the other side. And until then, we must be strong. We must be well equipped. That is the best deterrent against wars. I think the Arabs will think once and twice and three times, and maybe more. Should they really try again? It's very interesting. The other day, Sadat, the new president of Egypt, suddenly discovered that not in outlying villages somewhere on the Nile, but in Cairo and in Alexandria, there's a lack of water. And the roads aren't good. And I'm convinced that not everybody is housed. And therefore he set up a commission with a very impressive name, the Commission for the Needs of the Masses. Which means that only the masses probably haven't enough water, maybe some do have enough. This is only a sign of what is happening to the people in Egypt. What is happening to these Arab masses, these tens of millions of people that have known only misery and undernourishment and disease and ignorance for themselves and for their children, and the highest infant mortality. This is what the Arab leaders have given to their people and promised them one thing and one thing only, the glory of destroying others. No passion for building for themselves. No desire for a leader to lead his people to constructive efforts so that water is not a luxury and electricity is not a luxury and a house and life for the baby that is born is due to him. No, this is not important. What importance is there of the life of Egyptian children? The killing of Israeli children, this is a great ideal. To this you can lead a nation. And I'm convinced that that cannot go on forever. And maybe now people will have the courage to realize it. And God forbid, maybe even to say so. To express themselves. I've said over and over again, I just refuse to believe that an Arab mother loves her son less than a Jewish mother, that an Arab mother's heart is less broken over the death of her son than that of a Jewish mother. I refuse to believe it. And I can't imagine that generations of mothers in the Arab countries are overfilled with joy that they are sending their sons to one war after another, only not to have them come back. For what? Will one single child in Egypt live longer if Israel is gone, if Israeli children are killed? What kind of ideals have these leaders held up to their people? Because I believe in human nature, because I believe in these mothers and in these sons that don't want to die, because I believe that someday a new generation of leaders will come up before the 100 million Arabs in the world and will lead them on to something decent, constructive, full of joy, ambition to build and not ambition to destroy. Because I believe in that. And I know what we want. I know that there will be peace. And until then, we must be strong so that there will be doubts in the minds of these Arab leaders whether they should attack or not. But strong not only military-wise. We cannot let our society wait. We cannot say to our children, you can't go to school because we are engaged in a war. On September 1st, 850 children marched off to schools, elementary schools and high schools. And tens of thousands of young people are in the universities. And there is development in the country, and there is joy in the country, and there is music in the country, and theater in the country. And life goes on. And we must go on building, and above all, there are Jews coming into the country. 45,000 this year, and over 50,000 we have to prepare for next year. And this means housing. And this means more schools, and more roads, more farms, and more factories. This is how we live. This is how we want to live. And one demand, and one demand only. Last year when I was in the United States, over and over again I was asked by people, how long can you take this? I mean, we in Israel. And my answer was, as long as you can. And I'm asking you, friends in Canada, don't give up. Don't become despondent. Don't be pessimistic. Not only you are great, you have great people in Israel, young and old. All we want is you to be with us as long as we can take it. It'll be a long time. And as long as we can take it, with heads up, as long as we have the courage of our conviction, as long as we say no, not because it's pleasant, but we dare not say yes because we have weakened. We'll say yes when we think we should. We must say no when we think that we are duty-bound for the welfare of the state and the people to say no. Not only to enemies. The most painful thing is to say no to friends. Sometimes we have to do that too. It's very painful for us to hear sometimes our friends say no to us, when sometimes we feel that they do not understand quite what this is all about. I'm sure their intentions are good of our friends, but they do not always accept our ideas. That's permissible, but it hurts. So therefore, my friends, let us decide, as we stood together in the past, so will we in the future. But we will stand together actively. Whatever has to be done there, I promise, we will do it. And some things you have to do here, and I'm sure that you will. And as we have stood together in battle, and in difficulties, and in hardships, so together we will see the day of peace.
Probably the most difficult task this evening goes to Rabbi Gunther Plaut, whose job it will be to attempt to translate some of this outpouring and this warmth into words of appreciation for Mrs. Meir. Rabbi Plaut.
כבוד מלאתך, ראש הממשלה, הקהל הגדול הזה כבר הראה לך כמה עמוקה בליבו אהבתו לישראל ולמי שעומדת בראשה. ואני ברצוני להביע את ההרגשה הזאת בשם אחי יהודי טורונטו בדברים אחדים. Your Excellency, Madam Prime Minister, this great assembly has already expressed to you how deep is its love for Israel and for you who stands at Israel's head. And these people here, Mrs. Meir, they are just a few. There are nearly 100,000 who wanted to get into this synagogue and who had to remain without. And there are many others, not Jews, who would say, thank you to you for what you are, for what you represent. But these people here would like to speak to you not only because you are the Akeret Habayit, the Balabosta of Israel. You know, yesterday in Rosh Chodesh, we read from the psalm that speaks of Akeret Habayit. And then it says also, that this lady is more than that she is also Aim Habanim. And that is how we regard you, a mother of the sons of Israel, wherever they are. And Madam Prime Minister, if in Israel they say to you, Golda Shalanu, permit me in behalf of the Jews of Toronto and of Canada to say, Golda Shalanu Gamken. You made one demand of us. All I can say is, we will try. We will try to make you not only you who is an Aim Habanim, we want you to be Aim Habanim Samecha. We want you to be one who is happy as the mother of Israel. Go back then, Golda Shalanu, and tell the people of Israel, this is our message through you to them. You take it. Believe me, we will. We will. We will work with you. We will work for you, so that in our days there will be peace and rejoicing in the streets of Jerusalem and in the streets of the world. And so from the bottom of our hearts we say thank you, Toda Rabba, but no.